If manifestation has started to feel like homework, something is off. Not because you failed, not because you need another method, but because the manifesting state was never supposed to become another performance. At some point, the state has to stop being something you keep checking and start becoming the way you actually live. At first, the manifesting state can feel like something you are trying to do. You try to think the right thoughts, you try to feel the right feelings, you try to say the right affirmations, you try to stay calm, stay positive, stay certain, stay aligned. And for a while, it can feel like a technique. Something you practice, something you monitor, something you check on throughout the day. But the manifesting state becomes real when it stops feeling like a technique. It becomes real when you are no longer asking yourself every few minutes, am I doing this right? Am I in the state? Did I mess it up? Do I feel enough belief? That is where a lot of people get stuck. They are trying so hard to perform the state that they never actually relax into the identity. They turn manifestation into another thing to control, another thing to measure, another thing to judge themselves for. And that pressure quietly pulls them away from the very state they are trying to stabilize. Because the manifesting state is not supposed to become a performance. It is supposed to become the version of you that feels natural. At first, you may need reminders. That is normal. You may need to pause. You may need to redirect your thoughts. You may need to ask, who am I being right now? That is part of the process. But eventually, the goal is not to keep managing yourself forever. The goal is for the new identity to become familiar enough that your life starts moving from it naturally. That is the difference between technique and embodiment. A technique is something you do. Embodiment is something you live from. A technique says, I need to repeat this so I can become it. Embodiment says, this is who I am now, so my choices start reflecting it. A technique needs constant attention. Embodiment starts showing up when you are not trying to prove anything. For example, maybe you used to start every morning by checking whether you felt in the state. Before your feet even hit the floor, you were already measuring yourself. Do I feel calm enough? Do I feel certain enough? Did I wake up in the right energy? And if you felt off, the whole day started feeling like damage control. You would rush to fix the feeling, rush to affirm, rush to get back into the right mindset. But now the relationship is different. You wake up, and maybe the feeling is not perfect. Maybe your mind is quiet. Maybe your body feels tired. Maybe there is still a little uncertainty. But you do not turn that into a crisis. You still get up. You still choose the identity. You still move through the day without making every emotion a spiritual emergency. That is the manifesting state becoming real. Not because you forced a perfect morning, but because an imperfect morning no longer pulls you back into the old identity. Or maybe you used to repeat affirmations before a difficult conversation. You would try to make yourself feel confident. You would rehearse the words. You would try to control your nerves. You would tell yourself, I am respected. I am confident. I am chosen. And there is nothing wrong with reminding yourself. But the deeper shift happens when the conversation arrives and you do not abandon yourself. You speak clearly. You do not shrink your sentence. You do not apologize for having a boundary. You do not spend 10 minutes trying to make your truth sound acceptable. That is when the affirmation becomes behavior. That is when the state leaves your notes and enters your life. Or maybe you used to visualize success, but then avoid the practical step. You imagine the better opportunity. You imagine being seen. You imagine the new version of your life. But when it was time to send the email, ask the question, update the resume, post the offer, organize the plan, or walk into the room, the old identity pulled you back. So the state stayed in imagination. But when the manifesting state becomes more embodied, something changes. You still may feel nervous. You still may have a human moment, but you take the aligned step anyway. You send the email. You ask the question. You show up prepared. You let yourself be considered. You stop treating the new life like something that only exists when your eyes are closed. That is not technique anymore. That is identity. This matters deeply because many people accidentally hide inside techniques. They keep learning more, repeating more, watching more, writing more, checking more. Not because learning is bad, but because learning can become a way to avoid becoming. At some point, another technique is not what changes you. At some point, the shift is practical. You become the person who answers differently, chooses differently, receives differently, rests differently, prepares differently, stops chasing differently, handles silence differently. That is how the manifesting state becomes real. For example, maybe you are in a moment where nothing is happening externally. No big confirmation, no obvious breakthrough, no dramatic evidence. The old version of you would immediately start searching for a new technique, a new method, a new video, a new phrase, a new sign, anything to make the uncertainty go away. But the version of you who is stabilizing does something different. You return to your life. You make breakfast. You handle the next task. You keep your space clean. You continue the thing you said mattered. You do not punish the day for being ordinary. You do not turn silence into failure. You do not need every hour to feel magical before you trust who you are becoming. That is the state becoming normal. And normal is important because the real state often feels less dramatic than people expect. It does not always feel like a rush. It does not always feel like emotion. It does not always feel like excitement. Sometimes it feels like moving through life with less resistance, less panic, less checking, less overcorrection, less need to force the feeling. That does not mean nothing is happening. That may mean the state is becoming less fragile. A fragile state needs constant maintenance. A stable state starts becoming the way you respond. So the question is not, how many times did I affirm today? The deeper question is, what did I live from today? Did I live from fear or did I return to identity? Did I live from performance or did I move with honesty? Did I live from lack or did I make one choice that matched the new state? Did I live from needing proof or did I remain steady when the day looked ordinary? Those questions bring manifestation back into real life because the manifesting state is not just what you think during a quiet moment. It is how you respond when life gives you a chance to go back to the old version, when someone misunderstands you, when progress feels slow, when support appears, when silence shows up, when a boundary is tested, when an opportunity asks you to be seen, when the old pattern invites you to return. That is where the state becomes embodied, not in a perfect ritual, in the ordinary moment where you choose differently. And this does not mean you never use techniques again. Affirmations can help. Visualization can help. Journaling can help. Meditation can help. But they are tools. They are not the identity itself. The mistake is turning the tool into the source of power. The power is not in the notebook. The power is not in saying the sentence perfectly. The power is not in checking whether you feel aligned every hour. The power is in the identity you keep returning to. The tools should support the state. They should not replace living from it. So if you feel like manifestation has become exhausting, ask yourself, am I using this practice to return to myself, or am I using it to control my fear? That question can change everything, because a practice that returns you to yourself feels grounding. A practice used to control fear feels urgent. One creates steadiness. The other creates pressure. And pressure is not the state. Pressure is often the sign that you are trying to force certainty instead of returning to identity. So what helps? Simplify. Choose one real moment today where the state can become practical. Not a huge transformation. One moment, receive the compliment without rejecting it. Answer the message without performing. Take the next step without needing a sign first. Let the calm moment stay calm. Prepare for the opportunity instead of talking yourself out of it. Rest without making rest mean you are falling behind. Speak clearly without apologizing for existing. Choose one place where the identity becomes behavior. That is how the manifesting state becomes real. Small choices repeated long enough become your new default. Your new default becomes your new normal. Your new normal becomes the life you live from. And eventually, you stop asking, am I doing the state correctly? Because the state is no longer something you are performing. It is becoming the way you move, the way you choose, the way you receive, the way you respond, the way you return. That is when the manifesting state stops feeling like a technique and starts becoming who you are. Subscribe and enter your manifesting state.